Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Risky Business webinar series. We want to thank you for making the time to attend today's session. This is the fourth and last of four webinars, all dedicated to helping risk and security professionals like you. Today's focus will be on why leading CISOs are building GRC programs, secrets to long-term GRC success, and how to use peer benchmarking to elevate GRC performance. Today's webinar hosts will be Chris Logan, Senior Vice President and Chief Security Officer at Censinet, and Matt Christensen, Senior Director of Governance, Risk, and Compliance at Intermountain Health. Just as a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded. We invite you to use the Q&A feature on your Zoom participant screen to submit questions as they come up for you, and we're going to address them at the end of today's webinar. Both the slides and the video recording will be made available to you after the webinar via email. And if you wish to receive CEU credits for today's webinar, just reply to that email with the slides and webinar recording so we could get those credits to you promptly. Looking forward to having you all on today's webinar. I want to welcome you. And now I'd like to turn it over to Matt and Chris for today's program. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Saul. Appreciate it. And boy, are we excited. What a topic we have for you today. Talking about governance, risk, and compliance in your healthcare organization, and really how it can be a game changer for your organization to truly understand its enterprise risk and appetite for risk. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic today. I have a great co-host who's going to share his experience. So let's start by just introducing ourselves, right? So welcome. I'm Chris Logan, Senior Vice President, Chief Security Officer here at Censinet. I've been in the healthcare industry for way too long at this point. I've sat on the other side of the desk as a healthcare CISO for a number of years, and I journeyed to the other side to provide my skills and talents to help really satisfy the needs from the ecosystem of partners that are helping deliver products and services into your healthcare delivery organizations. That's enough about me. You've seen me if you've been on this webinar series before, so you're going to get much more of me as we go along. But let me pause and welcome Matt to come in. Matt, please share with us a little bit about your background and who you are.
Yeah, will do. Thanks so much, Saul. Thanks, Chris. So my name is Matt Christensen. I'm the Senior Director of GRC, as was previously mentioned. I don't have near the experience in healthcare that Chris does. I'm about 10 years now in healthcare, and then just over 15 in cyber itself. So I got my start in the largest call center in the world. We supported 125,000 employees and a team of 5. So it was, we were busy, I think is how I would say that. And then just worked in different roles within risk, internal audit, and cyber. So glad to be here. And while we're waiting for, it looks like a few more have joined, please drop in the chat where you're calling in from. I always love seeing where people are actually listening to us.
Yeah, and Matt, give yourself some credit. Just because I have a lot more battle scars from being in the healthcare industry, it doesn't mean we haven't shared the same same landscape, my friend. Right?
Yeah.
Just in different shades at the end of the
That's
day.
right.
Just at the end of the day. So what is the Risky Business webinar series? This has been a journey that you've taken with us, and I greatly appreciate everybody's participation up until this point. We really started this thing back in June, looking at what are some of those best practices for managing third party, managing risk assessments in your organization, create efficiency and effectiveness. And then we turned it into not just worrying about that digital landscape that's coming in from the ID department. What about the rest of the enterprise? So when we talked in July about all together now, was really looking at cyber risk as it's pervasive across your entire operating environment, really going into places that it's never been before, and how to protect patients from cyber attacks and those risks that are constantly being pervasive. Last month, we had the great opportunity to have a wonderful discussion about, one, how to just advance your cybersecurity career, but also learning lessons from a current sensitive customer and provider about how they're using third-party risk to really influence and engage, training that next level assessor within their organization to work at the top of the license. So now we're winding this thing down. This is 4 of 4. This is, big expectations here, Matt, right? Because ain't no mountain high enough. How do we take all that we've learned up into this point, all that we've explored, and really tie it into what governance, risk, and compliance means for our organizations, and how to use that to more effectively display or just inform and educate people about the risk that your organizations are undertaking. Now, with that said, The landscape's really significantly changed over the past 10, 15 years. If you think about cyber in its role today, it's really about patient safety risk. The digitization efforts that we've gone through and how pervasive it is across our organization has really created this confluence of forces that really compounds risk to patient care across all of healthcare. Just as a background, one of the things that we've seen over the course of the last few years is that ransomware attacks are growing in frequency and they're
Mm.
getting really vicious, right? So it's not just about a smash and grab, locking up your data. It's really about making it truly unavailable to impact patient care. And the industry is facing some shortages here. And it should come as no surprise to anybody on this webinar that there truly is a workforce shortage when it comes to cyber. Healthcare is not the only one suffering from that. It's all industries, but with the specialized knowledge and the complexity of the environments that we operate in, it's really important to have cyber at the forefront and really figure out how we address that shortage. And what's also taking shape is that we're seeing healthcare being delivered well beyond the four walls of the hospital. Digital is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. The cat's out of the bag, as they say, right? And we're going to continue to look at digital to drive better outcomes for patients, drive better just service line delivery, give people what they need for care and meet them where they are in their care journey. And what's really happening when you think about digital and expanding that attack surface is it's fueling this explosion in third party enterprise risk. So really understanding what this means to your organization. Now, what we're also seeing is that it's not just one silo, it's pervasive across the enterprise. So if I look at cyber risk teams or cybersecurity teams in healthcare, you're being asked to do more with less. So you're facing these superhuman demands, right? Third party risk management is only escalating that because now you have to look beyond what you're inside the four walls of the hospital. How are other people operating and using my information? So when you see that the shortage of workers is there, you're really seeing demand outstrip supply. You're now looking or being pressed to do more with less, understand more about the environment beyond the walls of your hospital so that you can operate safely when inside. Think about the complexity. So again, that digitization, you now have to capture and assess significantly more data points. And just an example, things like AI and ML that's creeping into how healthcare operations are providing care services, or even something as simple as move it for an example, right? A small software package that has significant impact when it comes time for patient confidentiality. More importantly, not only being asked to look at more, but you got to do it in manual fashion. So how do you monitor in real time? Well, manage this here creates that ever expanding landscape of enterprise risk in the way of things like clinical risk, operational risk, financial risk, and then others. I can't stress this enough. If you think about that landscape, tying in governance, risk, and compliance into these areas as focus points becomes a crucial component of your security program and educating those folks on the other side of the fence. So why GRC? What is GRC? I could tell you what I think it is, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause and I'm going to throw the baton over to Matt here because this is his bread and butter. This is his baby. This is what he knows inside and out. So Matt, please share with us your vision. What is GRC? What's an effective GRC program? And what are those things we should be concerned about when we think about governance, risk, and compliance programs in healthcare?
Yeah, great intro. I related with much of what you said, and I think specifically as you were talking about ransomware and just how fast that is growing. The one thing that is positive about ransomware, if there is something, and that is the awareness on the caregiver side now. So, specifically in healthcare, you used to be able to talk about you could bring up things like, oh, hey, what do you do? Like if you're seen as a patient, right, and you just have that small talk they say, "Well, what do you do?" And I work in cyber, and then you start geeking out on them, and they just kinda tune it out. Well, now when you say, "Well, I work in cyber, and we help prevent ransomware," then it's like, "Oh, yeah, I know what ransomware is," and then you can actually have dialogue, so I think that part's great. The easiest way I would summarize, what GRC is, it's all about creating culture within security as a culture. I mean, that's the easiest way to just boil everything down, and what is GRC? And that is helping create a culture of security in an organization. I think too often we have practitioners where when they're presented with a risk, they'll just go straight to, well, we have to put something in place, a lock on the door, a bolt on the window, security guards in the front. And I think too often we've just had this culture within the practice to just say, if there's a risk, then we mitigate it when really there's multiple ways you can manage risk. You can avoid it and just not do it entirely. You can transfer it, you can share it, you can mitigate it. There's different ways that you can do it. And that's where I see us going next gen is just re-educating folks and in many times the people that need the re-education is our own team, our own cyber shop itself of saying, yes, there's risk, but it's within the bounds that our executives and our board have set. So I think that's one key important point to remember is just that cyber doesn't get to determine risk. It's our job to put in front of our executive team, our board of directors, the risks at hand, and then they get to set those tolerance levels. And we're gonna get into that,
Yeah.
in future slides. But yeah, I love that cyber really can help create that culture. We're not a no shop, and we can't be. I think when you focus on hearing a risk at hand or one is presented like Move IT, it you want to just I don't know. Some of us just say no. We just say like we can't accept that risk, right? Or the business wants to be able to deploy in a new cloud environment that you haven't been in before. And it's not about saying no, it's about what do you want and how can we meet that need? So that's a big part of GRC.
No, that's fantastic. We've had this conversation a couple of times. We've talked
Yeah.
about it late. I think some of the key things that you've brought out in those conversations, although it may not have been direct, it may have actually been, on the periphery, is that risk across organizations is unique. So my health system may be performing the same function
Yeah.
as yours, just in a different form or fashion. I need to
Yeah.
understand why that risk is really unique to my organization. So I'm not the no shop. I'm the how
Yeah.
can we achieve this? Ask the why question and get to the right answer, and the idea that nothing is perfect. I want to stress this as well to everybody that's in attendance. There's no silver bullet for security in general. If there was, we wouldn't be having these conversations, right? The idea
Yeah.
at the end of the day is that there is no perfect. We strive for perfection and we continue to learn as we fail, as long as we fail fast and we fail forward, right? Because at the end of the day, we're going to have those shortcomings. Identifying those shortcomings is the key, though. So I'm gonna jump. What do you got? I see you got
Yeah, I
something.
know. It's fine if we need to move along. I think just to reinstate what you were gonna say, I mean, when it's really easy to wanna just say, "Okay, business, you tell us what the risk is, and then we'll work to that." And it's not like that. I've never been in an organization where, you'll have a board of directors and executive committee all come together and define what cyber risk is and then hand that back to you and say, "Now go protect it." It goes the other way around. I think it's just understanding that accountability.
Yeah.
It's our job as practitioners to enable them with good information, with the ability to say, these are things you should be concerned about. Not the gnat's eyelash, right? It's the things, big things like this will impact patient care. Those
Yeah.
are the things that the board wants to know of. And so, yeah. And then I just see it too much where everyone's like, all right, you just tell us what it is and then we'll work to do that. I'm like, no, that's not a good partnership.
I agree. And we're going to dive into this a little more.
Yeah, we will.
There's a subsequent slide that's going to speak to this concept or idea of themes that you're alluding
Yeah.
to, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to frame out a couple of topic areas, right? And this is just used as a guide for us. We do have slides that back this up to create some talking points and some dialogue, but we're going to really focus on these 6 areas to really define what next gen GR success program success could look like to an organization. So let's do that. Let's hop right into this first one: defining the overall enterprise risk appetite. In your experience, in your travels, the work that you're doing today, how do you help your organization from an enterprise perspective really understand what that risk appetite should or could be?
Yeah. It's a great question. It's not about, you've got this Windows 2008 server, that has 18 different patches that haven't been applied. It's not that. If you go to that level, it just flies over the board. They don't understand, and you likely won't get the support that you're seeking and should have. But instead, it's bringing it to that. If you're in healthcare, it's bringing it to the level of the clinician and saying, if we don't do this, then this is the applications that'll impact. You won't be able to take X-rays. You won't be able to, you know, to do imaging, whatever the case may be. It's getting to that level. So I think that would be the first thing is just saying, and there's that I think we started with the cyber safety is patient safety and patient safety is cyber safety, right? So I think just moving forward with putting putting terminology that can be understood, that isn't fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but it's palatable. It's terminology that hits home and specifically at a bedside or a surgery side or an ED or whatever the case may be. And again, this changes as your organization changes. 3 or 4 years ago, Intermountain Health was mostly a Utah-based health system, and now we're in 7 states, and we have over 300 clinics. And so, absolutely, our appetite and our tolerance levels have changed since our strategy has changed as well. So that would be one. I don't want to say advice because that makes it seem like I know it all, but that would be perhaps a takeaway for the audience is to go back and say, when was the last time we defined risk tolerance and appetite, even as a team, and then brought that up to the executive level and had them review and agree to it. And then how often are we revisiting it? There's good reason that you increase the speed limit on certain streets when you can prove that it doesn't necessarily decrease the safety. And you've got to do that at the board level. Is continually revisiting those themes, reaffirming that what we believe is the highest risk and what they, have confirmed, then we're all on the same page. But you've got to revisit that. You can't just set it and forget it.
It's an interesting concept, and this dynamic is that we as human beings, as individuals, we deal with risk decisions on a daily basis. I mean, just even
Every
getting out
day.
of bed in the morning is a risk decision sometimes. Depends on where you are, right? So, and I think about how you're defining these key risk themes. How do you ensure that you're managing those key risk themes and you're educating folks consistently and constantly to make sure that they understand the risk that they're willing to accept?
Yeah. Yeah. They have to be a theme. They can't be what are the specific threats? What are the specific risks? Like we talked about the gnat's eyelash. It can't be that. It has to be themes. And I believe there's a future slide on that, but you know, we'll probably get to it. But those themes really focus around, at least in our strategy, around always with patient safety, always, right? And then, you've got safeguarding financial assets and privacy and security. And our fourth theme really is around growth and complexity. So you have different risks, at that highest level, that first tier, as we like to call them, that the board should know about. And there should be an easy way for them to understand to say, yeah, we're within those tolerance levels. We're okay with that. And they should know and very easily understand when we're moving outside of those tolerance levels. And I think that's where the CISO and the CIO really play a big role in putting it in language that they can understand, in metrics that they can understand, where it's not technical, jargon. It's not, you don't inform them with, like I said, CVSS scores and certain vulnerability levels. And I don't even know if it's so much as a stoplight. I mean, we'll get to it, but the more you can simplify GRC, the more effective your program will be.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that the very next slide. But there's one other thing I wanted to point out here. If you look at the left-hand side of the slide, it's not just one icon.
Yeah.
This has to be an enterprise battle. Everybody has to be involved in this process because if you don't, and you do it in a silo, the chances something could go wrong, they're exponentially higher.
And what I love about that, Chris, is cyber for so many years. You've been in the game long enough. We're no longer an afterthought. I think we're well past that. It took a quarter of a century, but we're past that now. But we're now at the table with HR, with legal, with compliance, with other operational leaders, right? And it doesn't take much. In fact, one of the best ways that you can get buy-in in some of these other areas is to run a tabletop exercise. It's to basically say, okay, we just had a ransomware and we now no longer have HVAC systems. How do we, what's our strategy and, what's our playbook? How do we actually get continuity of services after that? And so I love that we're a component. We're within that spoke, right? We're not the spare tire that's often
Yes.
forgot about, neglected under the car, but we're core to the machine of all risk in any organization.
I love it. I love it. Let's jump forward. What about those core
Here
risks?
they are.
This is the thing we rely on. We teed this thing up so perfectly, I think, right? So what are these core risk themes? What are you seeing? What's your guidance here? And I know you started to share some of this, but
Yeah.
go into a deeper level.
Yeah, you bet. So first and foremost, patient safety for Intermountain Health is everything. And think about that. You don't have to, contemplate too deep or very long to relate with this. Most of us within the last 3 months have been in and seen a physician, or within the last 3 years have had either a minor or major surgery. And don't quote me on those statistics, but we're in the building frequently as a patient. If nonetheless, we should be there annually.
At least once.
And if you
At least
think
once.
about
At least once a year, please.
just
Don't
once a year. All
go
right. Well,
extreme, folks.
you and I have, yeah, maybe that's another topic we should. I'm a frequent flyer, so we'll
Go
just
on.
say, but as a patient, think about systems that are relied upon for them to give good care to you. Vital systems, your electronic health record. If you're having procedures done, I mean, it's everything from anesthesiology to imaging to everything through your post-op. All of that can be impacted directly through a material cyber event. Ransomware rarely will take out a single computer, and you don't just turn it off and go stand up a new computer, or you move to the next workstation. Um, the way that it spreads. So we always start with patient safety. In fact, I've never once been in a meeting where we haven't started that conversation with, is there a way that this can, negatively impact patient care, especially as we're doing risk reviews, as we're doing, um, assessments on new things. That's always our first question is, could this negatively impact patient care? And if it does, then guess what that does to our appetite and to our tolerance level? Totally shifts them. These other themes that we've got listed there, and we probably don't have time to deep dive into all of them, but really, it's how do we keep the business running? How do we maintain the privacy and confidentiality of all of our patients? And in our case, at Intermountain Health, we're an integrated system, so we have an insurance component as well. So our patients and members' safety, their information safe. And then as organizations grow, that landscape, the technological landscape changes. You introduce new networks into your environment, new cloud environments. You need to connect bridge A to bridge B with a million APIs. I mean, there's a million ways that you can introduce new risk into an organization when growth and is part of your core strategy. And then, of course, safeguarding financial assets. You don't have money, you can't run a business. So those are the main ones. Then really what I wanted to focus on here is just that's the level that you would focus to the board. That's the areas you would focus in and say to our board, to our executives, um, finding a way to give them a scoring component. If that's a stoplight, a red, yellow, green type thing, or a 0 through 10. But that's the level you need to be able to introduce risk to the board as to how we're doing staying within those safeguards that we've established. The minute you go deeper than that, I think you lose credibility, you lose attention. Then that next layer down, we often refer to these risk statements as a tier 2. So that second layer down. So
Yeah.
if you think of ransomware or a DDoS or malware, any of those threats that you often hear about or experience, depending on how large your system is or your threat profile, that's the statements that then can roll up to these main risk themes. So you might have ransomware roll up to multiple. Ransomware will impact patient safety, no question. It does often include a potential disclosure of patient information. Um, and then you can just follow those themes down. But not all risk statements will roll up. And so to the board level, again, you want to give them that enterprise perspective. And then if at all possible, depending on the size of the organization, you may want to break it out into certain regions. So you can still show the board, like we're showing a 4 out of 5 in one of those, right? Well, then where are we not 5 out of 5? And then you can drill down into the specific regional area where you may not quite have the same level of security that you do across the enterprise. Then that third layer is really the tactical. It's the we need to patch these Windows devices or these, Linux devices need to be patched, whatever the case may be. That's where you really get to that third layer down. These are the known risks. That's where you typically will see your action plans from a risk register, which I think we're going to get to as well. So hopefully that gives a little bit more broader understanding as how we've broken out those risk themes and then who the different audiences are. The audience for that tactical is typically your frontline who's working the issues. Then the risk statements would be kind of that. If you think hierarchy, from a hierarchy perspective, you those risk themes and the statements, excuse me, will typically roll up maybe to like a VP, but then it's board level from the tier one statements.
Well, you set it up beautifully because one of the things I love this concept of those themes driving down to risk statements to tactical operations. This is the work we got to get done. The problem is the work's never ending, right? So, and I'm going to jump to this next slide because you
Yeah.
teed it up perfectly. Is that what do we do now with that work? I know we have to track it. I know we have to manage it. How do we get rid of it? Who do we assign it to? How do you handle this, right? If you think about that comprehensive nature of the theme to the statements to the operational risk, what are
Mhm.
you doing to help satisfy that need to ensure that that operational layer is one being addressed and one being monitored at the same time? Because I think that's incredibly important as well as you roll that back up into those statements and those themes.
I think it's important to have an organization look at how are risks being identified and by which means, and then when they're identified, how are they being prioritized? And is it art or is it science or a little bit of both?
Yeah.
So if you think about all the potential avenues that risk can come in, it could be through an internal audit. It could be by doing your annual risk assessment. It could be an external auditor that was hired to pinpoint some areas of maturity. It could be a concern reported by an employee. I mean, there's a million avenues that these risks can then come in. And then it's that, okay, now we know about this potential risk. How do we then understand, is this something material? Is it something that we should, you know, put active resources on it right now? Um, I think about Log4j. That was, what was that, December of 21 or something like that?
Here was.
That was a big deal when that came out, right? And so while our team was still working normal, our register and working our risks down and trying to just keep up, we shifted and put all boots on the ground to mitigate those risks and manage those risks within, the Log4j vulnerability. So I think the key would just be there's got to be a simple way for organizations to ingest all the risks, a process that can then vet and materialize. You almost have to triage it. And forgive me if I use too many healthcare analogies, but that's the industry I'm most passionate about. You triage those risks to then understand how big of a deal is this, how widespread is it, and then from there, you can assign out resources. The thing I want to focus in on is that not every risk that lands in the register ends up being worked.
Yeah.
A- And that's a wild thing for some folks that have been in cyber long enough. That might just be mind blowing. But if you know about it, you have to do something about it. And I don't believe that to be true. I believe that you can manage risk, and part of managing risk sometimes is just accepting risk for what it is. Um, and again, we don't do that for the business, but if it's a big enough risk, we can bring this forward and empower the business leader to say, yeah, we know about this, but we have these other controls in place. That means we don't have to stop project A to fix this. What are your thoughts, right? And then we have that dialogue with the business.
That is wonderful. And this brings me back to a conversation I was having, I think literally like last week. This wasn't a conversation we were having. I was having this with somebody else. And somebody had asked me a question about, well, how do I eliminate risk in my environment completely? I was like, well, you just stop doing business.
Yeah, yeah,
Just shut
that's
the
right.
doors because it's not possible. It's not
Yeah,
possible. So I think what you said is spot on. And organizations really need to get their arms around that concept and ideas that there's some risk that's going to be acceptable, right? Monitoring, tracking, and understanding that risk is what's crucial. That element is crucial there to understanding the risk and making sure that it doesn't grow from what it actually is. Right? As the environment changes, as you bring new things into the fold, does that risk that you were willing to accept previously, which you're managing in your risk register, has it changed so that it needs to be addressed now? There's something else that needs to be tied into it to help lower the risk appetite or lower that risk threshold and create more of an appetite for
That's
that
right.
being there. No,
Yeah,
that's
and it's funny
wonderful.
too when you come to risk acceptance. I don't know if I should admit this, but I will. There was a time where I firmly believed you needed like wet signature from someone to say, I acknowledge, I accept this. And I did this once actually. I actually asked for a signature because it was something that, from my perspective, it it didn't meet Matt's muster, right? Like, and not that I'm always right, but it was an area that I'm like, we are taking on so much. This is in a prior organization, and the individual that had ultimate accountability said, "I'm not signing that." I'm like, "Well, then you acknowledge that there's more risk than you're willing to take on. So please sign this paper, right?" And he's like, "I'm not signing it." And I think that's the wrong way to approach it. I actually believe the best way when it comes down to something that material, where you're like, cyber says no, there's red light, the Whopper light is going full speed. And we say no, and we need someone on the business to say, you know, I'm on the hook if something goes bad because of that. In my opinion, the best way to get acceptance is to then have that business leader collaborate with peers and group think that out, right? So you
Mm,
don't hold an individual accountable, but you have a peer collective that says, no, we all agree. Like if we accept that risk for what it is, that lets us keep the other projects on schedule and we can provide better patient care. And then you start going back up to those risk themes, right?
yeah.
That when you can get the conversation going back to the risk themes, I think that's an indicator that your program's effective and that people are managing risk and not just mitigating risk.
And you said something. You said peer, and it made my ears go up a little bit because the next slide is really understanding how do you start to justify your program or justify improvements? Can you drive that through peer recognition? Is there opportunities for us as healthcare organizations to really focus on the benefits of what peer means and what we're hearing across the
Yeah.
market to solve some of these risk problems?
Yeah, and so now we're shifting to peer among, practitioners, not necessarily, business peers, right? So
Yep.
this slide really it's all about acknowledging that there's only one threat to cyber, and that's the adversary. Like, so when you can leverage data that can help am I investing too little in a program? Or am I overinvesting, which is a risk that, every good CISO has to acknowledge and say, are we bigger than we should be? When you can look at how are other organizations that are of similar size, where are they at? Is everyone scoring 100% and you're scoring 80? Because no one should ever be at 100% on a benchmark. But it does allow you to start looking at your program more holistically and saying things like, okay, we're showing, more areas of risk within identity. And as you look across the board, other peers are doing the same thing too. That can be reaffirming, or it can be alarming, depending on the
Yep.
benchmark that you're looking at. But as far as budget allocation, resource, all of the benchmarks themselves, we use the benchmark within the Censinet platform tremendously. It's really easy for us to pull that out. In fact, looking at a prior board deck that was shown, from our CISO, Eric Decker, he's pulling these metrics right out of, the Censinet platform and then demonstrating to the board that we're not over or under investing and that our risk tolerance levels seem to be in par with the rest of the industry. And here are some areas that we may be performing above industry, and here are the other areas that we need to work on and put more action plans in place.
Yeah. And I like this concept and idea because I think it helps us build narrative towards not just solving the operational risk issues that we're managing and monitoring, but getting up to that mission and those key risk themes now, because we have to communicate this up, right? And 9 times out of 10, somebody's always going to ask, well, hey, how do we compare about these guys down the street? But I think speaking in that language and allowing the board to truly understand that risk theme, where this data came from, becomes incredibly important. And it really leads into this next concept or idea is that now you've gotten that theme, you understand what that mission, what those statements are,
Mhm.
and what the operational responsibilities are. How do you communicate it up and speak in a language that those business leaders, which honestly, probably a handful of your board members don't have healthcare experience, right? They're probably business people from outside industry. How do you communicate those key themes to those individuals so they understand what that risk tolerance is?
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything, you have to know your audience. And in the case of a board of directors or senior executives, that's the audience that ultimately, we're serving from a perspective, right? I mean, our ultimate audience will be our patients, our members, our communities that we serve, but the ones that will hold us accountable is that senior that senior audience. And so, for me, it's understanding who they are, what their backgrounds are. I'm seeing a trend, Chris, and maybe you've seen this too, that now, cyber insurers, and it's more than just survey data, but it's actual, I think it's data that impacts our industry. They're saying how many of your board members have cyber experience.
Correct.
And if the answer to that is 0%, which I would say across the board, across industries, is probably pretty true. There might be some that have dipped their hand in it at one point, dipped their toe in it at one point or another, or have filled an earlier role, or maybe were involved. Maybe they were a CIO and they were involved in some kind of like BCDR type activities, business continuity, that sort of activities. Maybe. But most tend to not have that experience. And so if you can just know that right out of the gate, then that helps simplify your message to them. You don't report on those tier 3 very specific risks. You focus on here's how we can impact patient safety, or here are the things we're doing to improve the likelihood of patient safety not being impacted by a cyber event. I'm not practicing what I'm preaching here because I've used a little bit of a monologue here, but I'm also passionate about it. You have to keep your presentation data so clean, and you almost say, and this sounds bad, but it's like you make it to where it's junior high level, and you're not doing that because of competence. But the more confused you make your audience, the less they're gonna accept your message. That's 101. And so, I think under putting it into their perspective, into their language is key. I think, one of the best ways to help get support for program, is making sure you're using metrics that mean something. You can back those metrics up. Another way is by actually running exercises and saying, we think we know how we're gonna respond in a ransomware event, so let's test it. And then when you run those tests, I think eyes are opened. And then you go back and you report to the board, and you don't just hide, you don't shove everything under the rug that isn't pretty. Like, I think some of the best board presentations that I've seen do have more red on it than green. And it's not to send this alarming message, but it's being transparent about here are some areas we're concerned about. It's having that needed conversation with the board. So, and then just to tie back to what we've been talking about, simplify, simplify, simplify. Get everything back to core risk themes, and you should define those for your organization, for your industry. Make them easy and relatable.
No, that's wonderful. It's interesting because I agree with you. I think red's good sometimes. It's not for
Yeah,
fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
yeah,
It's validation of assumptions at the end of the day. And that's what we're here to do. Help them validate those assumptions. Those tabletop exercises are a great validation point because the moment something's not available, the whole world stops. And I have a lot of examples about that, but I won't go into those examples. And I want to echo something that you said. I worked for a larger organization, and the COO there always had a common theme that he said, regardless of the situation, Make your example Sesame Street simple.
Yeah.
There's a key message behind it, but it's
Yeah.
understood by everybody. And I think we do that. We bog down in complexity. We try to make something so fancy to communicate upwards to that leadership when all we need to do is speak. Just speak the language they understand and frame it appropriately. So there's no question when you leave the room what you were saying, right? At the end of the day.
So, Chris, along that line of Sesame Street simple, which I like, now I have to naturally create a meme for that. But what one thing that I've heard over and over from our CISO, Eric Decker, is this idea of, is it possible or is it probable? And it's funny, the more sophisticated, the more educated, the more intellectual your leaders are, the more they simplify what it is they're teaching us. And we've known this is just humanity in
Yeah.
general, right? I mean, the more deep messages come generally with fewer words. And I think as we consider our board, one of the best ways we could give them good information is to say, this is probable, or this risk is possible, but likely not probable.
Yeah.
And if we can help be that barometer and enable them, then they can start having those deeper conversations and saying, is this, they're saying that this is probable. Let's pause, let's discuss this. Let's make a decision, and then let's move forward. And so we oftentimes need to be that barometer. But the more simplified we can make that message, the more effective everyone is.
Yeah. Fantastic. So we have a lot of people on the line. I want to make sure that we leave time for question and answer. So we're going to wind
Yes.
this thing down, right? I have one more slide, one more bit of information I want you to share with our listeners out here. And it's about, you know, the cyber team's role when it comes to risk assessment. And what is your key takeaway here? What are you building in your group, in your organization, when it comes time to understand and assess risk, not approve it?
There's this great image of a mouse approaching cheese on a mouse trap, and the mouse is walking up. You can Google it, you can find it, but the mouse is walking up and it's at the mouse trap and it's got the cheese on it and the trap's set, and the mouse has the helmet on. And when I think of how we can manage risk, I go back to that silly image of that mouse approaching the cheese. Again, a lot of cyber practitioners will say, can't do the cheese, not worth it. Someone might die. We can't do it. Just can't, right? But there's that compensating control of the helmet.
Yeah.
And that is, we're managing that risk. And if it snaps, it's going to hit the helmet. I can get the cheese in and out. Or transferring risk. Maybe we send someone in else to get the cheese. Maybe that's part of it. But overall, our job is not to approve risk. Our job is to assess it effectively, present it in a way that executives can understand materiality, and then when asked, and maybe if needed, we can prod a little bit. Here's our opinion. Here's what we would do. When I'm treated as a patient, oftentimes I would say, well, if this was your child, what would you do? you know,
Yeah.
or if this was you, what treatment would you seek? And so, I think just getting that consensus, I think, is a really good way. So, yeah, I think that the overall message is that when we do assessments, specifically like third party assessments, we go in, depending on the level of risk of the assessment, we might go lighter. I'm not a fan of handing someone 300 questions if all it is they're going to come in and put lockers in our gym.
Yeah.
No padlock, no network connectivity. All they want to do is just do that. Great. I don't have to hand them 300 questions to then feel good about saying that vendor has had a completed risk assessment. But again, at the end of that assessment, we like to use the term complete the assessment as opposed to, well, we've approved the assessment, because the minute
Right.
you use language and terminology and nomenclature like approval, that you just rip leadership, from the accountable party's hands. And now they're just assuming, okay, well, cyber said I can do it, so I guess I can do that. When that's not the case. Our job's not to approve it, it's to assess and then to deliver those results. So it's one thing I love about the Censinet platform is you have that option to say, we've completed the assessment. And then when you hand that report, you say, here's the report that we've completed, and here are all of our findings. This is the things that we feel like you should know about that may impact our tier one initiatives, patient safety, growth, complexity, confidentiality, those ones. And by the way, here's some action plans that you can do within timelines that can then manage that risk appropriately and then move forward. So just handing them that assessment is not your approval of it, but it's your completion of the assessment.
Well, I love it because language matters. And I think that's in every
It does.
aspect of everything that we've talked about today. Is language does matter across all those steps.
That's right.
And if I think about, what we've gone through, and I'm just going to recap real fast. We started to talk about GRC, why it's so important to an organization, and the language of the program, how it's disseminated matters. It truly does. To find that risk appetite, really look around. How do we align risk themes to be able to report up and simplify how we report those through a risk register? Benchmarking against peers to create that narrative to help drive the theme, and then communicating that with the board of directors, right? Making it clear and simple in the language that they understand.
Yeah.
But more importantly, understanding and assessing risk and not approving risk at the end of the day. That's the real job of our assessors that we're tasking to help our organizations really start to define enterprise risk and start to deal with enterprise risk across all those different silos. So again, I'm going to stop talking. Is there any key takeaways you want to drive home in this last minute or two before we open the floodgate for questions?
I appreciate the opportunity to monologue even further, Chris. Look, I feel like GRC is far more than just a paperweight. We don't just have this, ongoing widgets that we're cranking out and we know about a risk, we do an assessment, we move on. I think our role is to compile all of that risk that then comes in, to use that professional judgment, or in many cases, a collective group think, but something that can get us more to science than art. And then being able to then roll up the most important things in which we might need financial support for. We might need, maybe we need to bring on contractors for a couple months to knock out, a material risk, or to bring an organization back into compliance, whatever the case may be. But GRC is a function that I think keeps the rest of the cybersecurity engine going. And we can be used, and I say used, but we can be leveraged, perhaps better stated, in a way to help get more resources for a team. If I hear this all the time, well, I don't have enough resources, otherwise I would do that. Because I agree with you, Matt. That's something important that we should do. We just don't have enough resources. We'll leverage GRC to help write a report that can expose the risk. And maybe in doing so, you determine that there's really not a lot of materiality in that risk. So it's not something that, you're going to go stick your neck out on, but perhaps by doing a risk assessment, even internally, you can expose, here are the top 5 things that if we don't do that, here's the associated consequences from it.
Yeah.
So that's probably what I would leave with is, if anyone's considering GRC as a career, or maybe you don't have a full team and GRC just naturally, organically falls into an area of responsibility. Just if I could hone on one thing, it's we don't own any. What we owe to the business is effective management of risk, and that's not always mitigating. It's not, because mitigation is expensive, it's costly, it adds friction. It's just thinking things through and saying, this is something that I feel like our organization is within our tolerance level, we should accept, and I should make that recommendation to the business. And then from there, obviously, pass that off.
Well, great stuff, man. Matt, I can't thank you more than sharing, your insights, your vision, and what you've done. I appreciate you joining me today. And now, Saul, let's open the floodgates, as they say. Let's see what questions are out there that Matt can answer, because he's the talent here. I'm just the moderator.
I know.
Well, fantastic job, guys. A really great discussion. And so we do have a couple questions. So let's tee those up. Oh, and by the way, your question, Matt, we got some responses in the Q&A. We got Boston and Hawaii, Virginia and Atlanta and Idaho. We got folks from all over the country attending
Great.
today's webinar. So great to see the representation, and I love that question. Thanks for asking that. Um, any tips for how to get involved with the GRC strategy at your org when you're not yet on the strategic job level?
Mm-mm. Okay, so I think my first response, and Chris, I'd love to hear your thoughts too. You don't need to have a title to have influence at a strategic level. I believe that firmly. It's a certain title might get you into a meeting or into a discussion, but that isn't what equates influence. Some of the best risks have been identified by people in our organization and prior organizations I've worked at that don't have these, big titles, right? But they see something, they say something, um, and they put it in a way where it's like, "Oh, wow, this could directly impact patient care." So we often will refer to, just if you and I it's a government thing, right? But see something, say something. That's probably the best way, and then I think just in getting involved and getting educated on what risk tolerance and appetite even means. What's the difference? What would you anticipate your organization be? Like, what are the speed limits for your organization and for your industry? And then the third thing I would say is just get educated in the space. There's no shortage of GRC podcasts. There's no shortage of opportunity to get involved with, some of the like ISC Squared, the ISACAs of the world. But start participating in those local chapters because that's where you'll typically end up meeting people like Chris, who you can then bounce things off of. But yeah, that'd be what I would say. What would you add, Chris?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. I like this question a lot because it really starts to get at the heart of culture. And I think
Yeah.
culture is probably the most important element of any organization. It's not all the fancy tools we have, it's about the people. And if I start to think about the culture that we want to build in our organizations, you want a culture of transparency and you
Mhm.
want a culture of courage. And what do I mean when I say a culture of courage? Everybody has a voice. And again, you see something,
Mhm.
say something. I know it's a government thing, but there's a reality here, especially in the field that we work in. If you're in a healthcare provider organization, it's really your responsibility that if something does not look or feel right, you got to be able to speak up and say
Yeah.
so. So as a leader, I want to encourage that in my staff. And even if that staff member is not a part of the GRC program, I hate to say, you've said this to me before, and I'm going to reuse this again. Everybody in your healthcare delivery organization is a caregiver, first and
Mhm.
foremost. I don't care if you work in laundry. I don't care if you work in the supply chain or in IT. You are a caregiver because there's something that you do on a day-to-day basis that's going to impact patient care along the way. So having that transparency and the courage to stand up and say something, even if you have to take it up the chain, do it in a very humble manner, but do it in a manner that creates a sense of urgency around it. When you see that, that's what we want to build. That's what any good leader is really going to start to drive and push for. Now, getting involved in the GRC space, that's easy. You don't have to be a GRC analyst to be involved in GRC space because GRC is not pervasive across the organization, but it's present across the organization, like Matt has alluded to, right? It's not a single silo effort or energy. You play a role somewhere along the line in understanding governance, risk, and compliance in your organization. You have the ability to add that influence as well. And we should be really thinking about training our people across those boundaries because a workforce that's more diverse in thought, more diverse in action is going to be what? Just a better workforce and uncovering areas that we need to start to address, right? So really that transparency, that courage and getting people involved at all levels, critically important to our success and what we're trying to accomplish is what? A better outcome for the patient at the end of the day.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Chris. And if there are any follow-ups to that, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A. We also have Ohio in the house, so want to call them out. Got a plug for Ohio there. This one is a little off topic, but is Censinet doing a benchmarking study this year? I heard fall at one point.
I guess I'll take this one because Matt probably doesn't have the answer for this. Yes, we
I have
have.
my suspicion.
Sneaking suspicion. Yes, we absolutely are. We'll be kicking this thing off really shortly. We're looking for more participants. We're going a little bit deeper into the well to make sure that we're addressing those areas from the previous benchmark survey and expanding it to give you more rounded, more robust information. Simplest way to get involved, send a quick email, benchmarking@censinet.com. You send an email to that, it'll come to a whole bunch of us over here. We can start that process with you to get engaged and be a part of that next wave 3 for benchmarking.
Thank you, Chris. And we're getting a lot of thank yous here. So just want to give you, Matt and Chris, kudos for a great webinar today. And thank you all for the questions. One that came up is repeat the email address for the CEUs. Just as a reminder, everyone, you'll get an email after this webinar. You'll receive a recording of today's webinar, the slides. Reply to that email, let them know that you want those credits, and they'll respond very quickly to make sure you receive those. So we are here at the end. We're no more questions in the Q&A. Is there anything else, Matt and Chris, that you wanted to close out with?
Yeah, I'll conclude, and then Chris can kind of sweep the floor as it is. Just a huge thanks to for putting this together. Thanks to Censinet for driving the questions and the content. I love working in cyber, and I love working in healthcare. You don't have to go too deep in our family to understand why I chose healthcare. Um, and I won't get into those details then, but I know my why, and it's rooted around helping people live the healthiest lives possible, which is, Intermountain Health's mission statement. And when I can do that in a way where cyber can directly impact people living their healthiest lives, there's meaning to that. So it gets you through, the 14-hour of back-to-back meeting that occasionally will happen. You guys say risk never sleeps. I often think I never sleep. But knowing your why can really, I think, drive a wonderful career in cyber. And the last thing I just throw out there for any of the attendees, I'd love to connect on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear your story. I'd love to know if you've been in cyber, or if you're thinking about changing careers, if you think about GRC. So please find me on LinkedIn. I'm somewhat active on that platform, but I'm always responsive there. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, and I just real fast, I want to echo that and thank Matt for his participation, and really thank all of you for joining us. All right, this has been a journey. We came up with this idea, and we started this because we wanted the voice of the practitioner to be heard. We wanted the practitioner to understand how they could get out there in the enterprise a little bit deeper, how they could better their career and train a little bit differently. And then how can we escalate what we're doing on a day-to-day basis? This isn't the end for us, right? There's going to be something else we're going to do this same type of form and fashion. But really, again, thank you for participating with us through this series. And more importantly, remember, this is a team sport. I can't stress this enough. There's no one single person in healthcare delivery that solves any one problem.
Mhm.
It's really a team that's going to solve that problem, whether it's on the care side, the administration side, whether it's even in research and development. There is a team of folks that are focused on improving that outcome to that patient. And we, in the IT side of the house, in the risk side of the house, we are a part of that. We are part of that linchpin that's holding this all together to help people understand what their role, what their responsibility is, and how we can assist them to drive that better patient outcome. So again, know your why. Why am I here? I love the mission of healthcare. I want to leave it just a little bit better tomorrow for my kids to take advantage of than what I'm dealing with today, right? So if I can do that in some form or fashion, by God, that's what I'm going to do. But it's going to require all of you on this webinar as well. I can't do it myself. I need your help and I need your support. So I greatly appreciate your time and attendance and your attention. You need anything at all, you know where to find me. I'm pretty active out on LinkedIn, Matt, so they can find me pretty easily, and I will direct them to you. Don't you worry about that.
Not worried about that.
So again, appreciate everybody's support in this journey.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for your time and attention. And everybody have a wonderful day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.